The sun hung low over the dusty town of Redstone, casting long shadows across the empty streets. Most townsfolk were already behind locked doors, weary of the heat and the fear that had settled like a thick fog over their small frontier community. Outlaws had run rampant in the past months, and even the sheriff, a man named Carter, seemed to have given up, his once proud badge dulled by disappointment and loss. Into this weary town walked a man whose name nobody knew, a cowboy whose quiet steps seemed to stir the very air itself. He carried nothing but a worn leather satchel, a hat pulled low over his eyes, and the kind of calm presence that made people instinctively step back. Eli Turner had been traveling for days, through barren plains and narrow canyons, with nothing but his horse and an unshakable sense of purpose. He had no gang to back him, no wealth to flaunt, and yet there was something in the way he held himself that suggested he was not to be underestimated. The townspeople watched him from windows, whispering and speculating, but he did not acknowledge their stares. He tied his horse outside the saloon, adjusted the strap of his satchel, and stepped inside, where the smell of whiskey, dust, and old wood hit him like a wave. The saloon was dimly lit, its few patrons silent except for the occasional shuffle of boots or the low murmur of a poker game in the corner. Behind the bar, the bartender, a tall man with a permanent scowl, glanced at Eli with mild suspicion. "New in town?" he asked. Eli simply nodded, ordered a coffee, and took a seat near the window. His eyes scanned the room, not with curiosity but with careful attention, noticing details most would overlook, the pattern of tension in the gambler's hands, the subtle glances exchanged between men who feared someone, something. It didn't take long for the man they called Black Jack and his gang to notice him as well. They lounged in a shadowed corner, their presence a mixture of arrogance and menace, and they had already made the town bend to their rules. A few of them nudged each other and whispered, daring to judge this quiet stranger, thinking him weak or perhaps foolish. But Eli's eyes met theirs once, steadily, without anger or intimidation, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the streets of Redstone were quiet, but Eli noticed the signs of oppression, the boarded-up windows, the hastily nailed, "Keep Out" signs, and the small businesses forced to close because no one dared resist the gang. He spent that evening walking the town's perimeter, silent and unassuming, yet every step calculated, every observation careful. He spoke to no one, not yet, choosing to understand the rhythm of fear that had gripped Redstone. By nightfall, the saloon's dim lights flickered as the townspeople slowly began to realize that something unusual had arrived with Eli Turner. He did not boast, he did not challenge, and yet, the way he carried himself suggested a quiet kind of authority that even the most hardened outlaws could not ignore. The sheriff, noticing this newcomer, felt a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. Perhaps, just perhaps, this man was different. The next morning, Eli quietly helped a young shopkeeper who had been harassed the day before by Black Jack's men. It was a small gesture, simple but meaningful, and it did not go unnoticed. Rumors began to spread. People whispered of the quiet stranger who had helped the weak, who had walked the streets with eyes that missed nothing. Some dismissed it as luck or coincidence, others wondered if he had some hidden skill, some unseen power that would soon reveal itself. Eli never spoke much, and that was the strange part. His actions told the story, not his words. And as he walked back to the saloon that evening, tying his horse with the same calm assurance as before, the town of Redstone held its collective breath. Something had changed, though none could yet name it. The air felt different, the shadows longer, and a sense of expectation lingered in the dusty street. Redstone had seen many strangers, many hopeful men, but none had ever carried the quiet certainty that Eli Turner did. As the first stars began to pierce the night sky, Eli sat by the window of the saloon, quietly observing, patiently waiting, and the townspeople, for the first time in months, dared to feel a spark of hope. Something was coming, something that would challenge the very foundation of fear they had lived under. And though they did not yet understand it, the story of Redstone was about to change forever. The next morning, Redstone stirred under the hot, relentless sun, but something had shifted. The townspeople moved a little straighter, held their heads a little higher, and whispered about the quiet stranger who had arrived the day before. Eli Turner was already on his horse, making his rounds through the dusty streets, his calm eyes scanning every corner, every alleyway. He noticed the nervous glances of Black Jack's gang as they lounged near the general store, confident yet uneasy. Something about Eli unsettled them, though they could not put their finger on it. Eli rode slowly, stopping briefly at the shopkeeper's front door. The man, still shaken from the previous day, managed a grateful nod. Eli said nothing, tipping his hat ever so slightly before moving on. The message was clear: the quiet stranger was watching, and he would not ignore injustice. Black Jack's men observed from the shadows, smirking at first, thinking it a game to taunt this lone cowboy. One of them, a tall man with a jagged scar on his cheek, stepped forward, approaching Eli with a mocking swagger. "You new here, cowboy?" The man drawled, his tone laced with contempt. "We don't take kindly to strangers meddling in Redstone." Eli paused, his eyes meeting the man's without a flicker of fear. "I'm just passing through," he said softly, voice calm yet firm. "But I notice when folks get treated unfairly." The gang laughed, though it was uneasy. They were used to cowards, not quiet men who seemed to carry a weight of purpose in the gaze. Black Jack himself, leaning against a fence post, observed the exchange with narrowed eyes. He had built his reputation on fear and intimidation, and yet this one man, this outsider, did not flinch. For the rest of the morning, tension quietly mounted. Eli walked through the town, helping here and there, lifting a fallen wagon, guiding frightened livestock back to a pen, speaking a few words of encouragement to the shopkeepers. Every small act, unnoticed by some, sent ripples of hope through the town. Redstone had grown accustomed to despair, and the townsfolk had forgotten what courage looked like. Yet Eli reminded them, not with words, but with action. By midday, Black Jack grew restless. The gang cornered a young boy near the water trough, demanding payment for some imagined debt. The boy froze, terrified, and the townspeople could do nothing. But Eli was nearby. He stepped out from the shadow of a building, slowly, deliberately, drawing the attention of every outlaw. A hush fell over the street. Even the wind seemed to pause. Without raising a hand to strike, Eli moved with precision, using the terrain to his advantage. He startled the gang with a clever diversion, sending a stack of barrels tumbling toward them, forcing them to scatter. It was not brute force, not a gunfight, but strategy, timing, and calm presence that shifted the balance. The boy ran to safety, eyes wide, heart racing. The gang's laughter faltered, replaced by confusion and a creeping unease. Eli didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. He simply walked back to his horse, adjusting his satchel, tipping his hat once more. The townspeople watched from windows and behind doors, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The man who had arrived quietly yesterday had turned the tide without spilling blood, without raising panic, and yet his presence alone had sent a clear message: Redstone could fight back. By evening, rumors spread like wildfire. The quiet cowboy had not just helped the boy, he had unsettled the most feared gang in the county. Whispers of his past began circulating, though no one knew the truth. Some speculated he had been a soldier, others that he had survived countless dangers before. But the fact remained that the balance in Redstone had shifted. Fear had lost a little of its grip, and for the first time in months, a sense of possibility lingered. Black Jack seethed, retreating to the saloon with his gang, plotting their next move. Eli, meanwhile, returned to his rented room above the saloon, quietly observing the town from the window. He did not speak to anyone that night, yet his presence alone seemed to keep the town safe. Redstone was on edge, not from terror, but from anticipation. The people sensed that something was coming, something decisive, and that Eli Turner would be at the center of it. As the stars emerged above the desert, glimmering like tiny sparks of hope, Eli remained watchful. The town's quiet tension mingled with possibility, and even in his solitude, the cowboy prepared for what was inevitable. The balance of power in Redstone had been tested, and soon, every secret, every plan, every hidden fear would face the judgment of the man who had arrived silently, but whose actions were destined to be remembered forever. The morning sun crept over Redstone, painting the streets in golden shadows, but the town was no longer the same. Black Jack's gang, humiliated by the previous day's clever maneuvers, was restless and dangerous. They whispered of revenge, gathering in corners and dark alleys, plotting to reclaim the fear and control they had lost. Yet Eli Turner moved through the town with the same calm determination, as if he already knew what was coming. He did not rush, did not panic, and he did not need to. The townspeople, inspired and emboldened by his presence, watched him with quiet hope. By midday, the inevitable confrontation began. Black Jack and his gang emerged from the saloon, faces hard, eyes glinting with fury. They cornered Eli near the center of town, but he did not flinch. The sheriff, standing a few paces behind, dared to hope that the quiet cowboy could accomplish what he himself had failed to do. The townsfolk peeked from windows and doorways, hearts pounding. This was the moment that would decide the fate of Redstone. Black Jack sneered, stepping forward. "You think you can change things in this town?" He spat, his voice dripping with menace. "You're just one man, cowboy. One man against all of us." Eli said nothing at first. His eyes scanned the street, noting every detail, the placement of barrels, the layout of doors, the distance between buildings. He was calm, measured, and utterly confident. Then, with a subtle motion, he triggered a small chain of events that sent the gang scattering, barrels tipping, dust rising, horses startled, and the ground itself seeming to rebel against them. Chaos, but controlled. Not a single gun fired, not a drop of blood spilled. The townspeople gasped, unable to believe the daring and precision of Eli's actions. Black Jack stumbled, humiliated, his gang retreating into alleys and the shadow of the saloon. The townsfolk, emboldened, began stepping out into the streets, reclaiming the spaces that had long been controlled by fear. Merchants reopened their shops, children played near the water trough, and even the sheriff began to smile for the first time in months. Redstone was alive again, and all because of one man's courage and intelligence. Eli didn't celebrate, didn't claim credit, and didn't linger. Once the immediate danger had passed, he walked slowly to his horse, mounted, and surveyed the town one last time. The people were watching, their eyes full of gratitude and awe. He tipped his hat to the sheriff, nodded once to the town, and then turned his horse toward the horizon. Redstone would remember him, not for gunfights, not for violence, but for showing that courage, cleverness, and heart could achieve what brute force could not. As Eli rode away, the wind carrying dust across the open plains, stories of his deeds began to circulate. Some would exaggerate, others would remember the small, clever actions that had changed everything, but all would agree on one thing: the quiet cowboy had transformed Redstone. Even years later, children would hear the tale of the man who arrived silently, acted decisively, and left without a word, leaving a legacy of hope. The sun dipped low once more, casting long shadows across the desert. Eli disappeared into the horizon, a solitary figure against the endless sky, leaving the town to flourish under the spirit he had reignited. And though his face would fade from memory, the lessons he imparted, the courage to act, the power of clever thinking, and the strength of quiet confidence, would remain embedded in Redstone forever. The townsfolk returned to the daily lives, but now with a spark that fear had never allowed. Windows no longer stayed shuttered, voices were no longer hushed, and even the sheriff walked a little taller. Eli Turner had reminded them all that fear could be challenged, that injustice could be confronted, and that one person, armed with intelligence and heart, could change the course of a town's destiny. Answer: Redstone endured, forever altered by the cowboy who came quietly, acted decisively, and vanished like a shadow at sunset. The town's story was no longer one of fear, but of courage and hope, a story whispered from generation to generation, beginning and ending with the quiet man who had taught them all that true strength often speaks softly, yet resonates forever.